Hello.
Oh, are we on?
I believe so.
Are we doing this thing now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've pressed record and everything.
Oh, well done.
Although I'll just check.
This is live, folks.
Yeah, it's recording this week.
Oh my
this
goodness,
time.
the technical genius. Anyway, it's good to be back.
Yeah. And continuing our run of reviewing all the best albums that have come out this year.
Yep.
Or not, depending on your point of view. We have the 10th album from Morrissey, World Peace is None of Your Business. Debut album by an Australian band called 5 Seconds of Summer, which is called 5 Seconds of Summer. We have the 21st studio album from Yes, still going, Heaven and Earth. We have the Roux' second album, which I forgot to write the title down to. You know,
you can't remember it, can you?
It's the one that's not called La Roux.
It's LaRue's second album.
Yeah. While Pete looks that up on Tinternet, we're also doing Cut Copy, Free Your Mind, their fourth studio album. And finally, the third solo outing from Jenny Lewis called The Voyager.
Of course, LaRue's second album is Trouble in Paradise, more on which later.
It is Trouble in Paradise.
Yeah.
But we start off with Stephen.
Yeah.
The return of Morrissey.
Yeah.
With World Peace is None of Your Business. Is it a welcome return?
No. Done my research this time. Okay, let's take this from the top. I actually found this album was vastly superior to the last album.
Yes.
I
agree with that, because the last album, Years of Refusal.
Years of Refusal, that was it.
Yes, we were trying to think of that earlier on. Yeah.
Years of Refusal. But I have to admit, it doesn't quite touch the grand heights of You Are the Quarry.
No.
Or the gentle slopes of Ringleader of the Tormentors.
I would agree.
So I have to. So whilst it feels like it's his best album in about 8 years, it probably isn't.
Well, it probably is, but
you know what I mean.
But yeah.
Yeah. So what do we have here? More of the usual, would you say?
Yeah,
you would. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's to be fair, World Peace is None of Your Business. The title track sort of kicks the proceedings off. It's the usual run of Stephen's appraisal of the world situation, references to current events and geopolitics thrown in for good measure.
Yeah.
And of course, some of the more confused politics that come out of his work sometimes. And then the album sort of slumps, in my opinion, into just sort of a ramble of stuff. Before, and I have to say, credit where it's due, before picking up. The final third of the album I actually quite enjoyed. Noticeably, where actually the band was stripped out, and I felt that actually the final third of the album was a lot more acoustic.
There is more of the bizarre kind of flamenco Spanish guitar thing
but
going
I
on.
quite like that because that felt like a progression, you know. Whereas a lot of the rest of it, and I'm talking about most of it, just felt like some of the same old from Years of Refusal.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's the same old anyway, because it's just what you do. I mean, I agree with you. It starts off. I think it starts off bizarrely. I think it starts off pretty good, pretty strong.
Yeah,
I quite like the first half of the album, and then don't like the second half of the album at all.
It's a classic Peter V. Scott situation.
Yeah, I think pretty much at actually possibly at Staircase to the University. I might just include Bullfighter Dies, but I think the last five. I think Oboe Concerto and Mountjoy are dreadful.
Okay, I'll agree with you on the last track. Yeah.
And as you say, you've got that usual kind of stuff, and it's like, oh, meat is murder. Yeah, we know Morrissey. We've got that. And then, as you say, it's confused politics with World Peace is None of Your Business, talking about all these dictatorships, and then at the same time saying, each time you vote, you support the process. And you're thinking, yeah, you're still a knob.
Yes.
You know, it's just, yeah. And as you say, it's kind of perfunctory. It's kind of perfunctory Morrissey album. It's not awful, but it's just. And you've got I'm not a man, which again is that same kind of thing as basically saying, I'm not a twat and I don't eat meat, therefore I'm great because I love the earth. And you're thinking, yeah, over 8 minutes it's taking you to tell me that. The first minute and a half of which is almost silence, and then some birds tweeting and some other rubbish. However, I really like Istanbul, and I like Neil Cassidy Drops Dead because I quite like the guitars and that. And Neil Cassidy Drops Dead does have the first hinting of the flamenco guitar kicking in halfway through, which I thought was actually quite nice.
I suppose I quite liked Istanbul. Actually, you come to mention it, of the first half of the album, I quite liked Istanbul. It sort of hinted back to sort of the ringleader stuff, which I quite enjoyed. But really struggled with this album, to be honest.
Yeah, it's almost an hour long as well.
Yes.
So,
wow, what a downer!
Onto a shorter album, and the debut album by a young Australian band called 5 Seconds of Summer, eponymously titled. And reading up on these, apparently they started off basically just doing covers and stuff on YouTube, and picked up quite a following on YouTube, and then were chosen to support One Direction on tour globally. And off the back of that, that's resulted in this debut album, which has not only hit number 1 in the States, but also in 12 other countries, and number 2 in the UK. It's essentially one of those albums that the young people are listening to, apparently. And it is, it's kind of Busted, McFly, Blink-182, Green Day type influence, pop punk. But I have to admit, I quite like this album.
Yeah.
It reminded me somewhat of listening actually to early Rick Springfield, kind of early 80s Rick Springfield, and they kind of do borrow a couple of riffs from him actually, a fellow Australian as it happens. And it's just bubblegum pop rock, ideal summer listening, puts a smile on your face. First few tracks in particular I think are really, really good. So, She Looks So Perfect, Good Girls, Kiss Me, I really like, and Don't Stop, which is the second track, which I think is the standout track on the album.
Yeah.
Which I think is just a really great piece of pop. And it's sugary, yeah, it's overproduced, but frankly these days amongst, mainstream artists, what isn't? And there's some self-depreciating lyrics in there, and they come across as, an actual band rather than, they do write their own stuff, judging by the songwriting credits.
Yeah.
And basically it has to be said, considering some of the albums we've listened to and reviewed this year, I prefer to listen to this than a lot of those, and also more than the last Green Day album as well.
I agree with a lot of what you just said. I've heard them described as the Australian One Direction. I would agree with that, but I wouldn't mean it in the slightest bit of a derogatory way.
Yeah.
They are actually a fresh boy band, but they are, and it's hard to call it original because it isn't.
No, it's not.
It's bubblegum punk pop, but at the same time, clearly, they're talented. They write their own stuff, and it's just a good romp of a pop album. Surprisingly entertaining, and yes, you touched on this, better perhaps than some of the more serious artists that are doing this. And we've reviewed Green Day and Blink-182 albums in the past, and actually I would rate some of the stuff on here higher than the grown-up stuff.
Indeed.
It is what it is, but actually it's a very entertaining listen. They're obviously going to be massive, but I can see them far outlasting One Direction, who they supported.
Quite possibly so.
Yeah, quite possibly so. Also, there's there's about 15 versions. Of this album
to say,
as well.
there is a very long version of the album. Thankfully, the proper version of the album is
quite short.
Is quite short. But yes, there is.
But they do switch in tracks on other versions of the album as well. But of course, who records an album of stuff nowadays is a complete work.
Yes.
You can have a song called English Love Affair for the UK market. You can have a song called American Sweetheart for the US market. So there you go. What does it matter anymore, hey?
Pleasing everybody.
So yeah, surprisingly good. I have to say I wasn't really looking forward to reviewing that, but I actually found it rather entertaining, and I listened to it more than twice.
Ditto. So we move on to theoretically prog rock, but we'll wait to see if that is the case or not. With the 21st studio album from Yes, first with singer John Davidson, who's replaced John Anderson, although his voice is very similar to John Anderson's, and that kind of slightly high pitched kind of timbre. Rest of the band, Steve Howe, Chris Squire, Jeff Downs and Alan White, so it's the version of the band that's been touring mostly for the last 10 years. 8 tracks, but again 50 minutes. As you might expect, some longer tracks on an album of this ilk. How did you find Yes?
This really isn't my scene. And what do you mean this is prog rock? This is prog rock, right?
Well, isn't
it? No. See, in my mind, prog rock, I've got those visions of, the gigs at what was then, the Empire Arena with Rick Wakeman skating around on ice, wearing a flowing tunic.
If only there was that kind of stuff in here. There isn't that kind of stuff in here, though.
While Greensleeves is piped through an accordion in the background.
Yeah.
There is an element of that on here.
Not much of it, though.
Certainly, I found the intro of the first track was very much of that ilk.
But then didn't you then think it just sounded like Together in Electric Dreams?
Yeah, okay, fair point. But you know what? Actually, again, first track aside, which did make me cringe, I actually found that this was quite a good album. There's a good album in here somewhere. It's not my thing at all.
Yeah.
But actually, again, once the album sort of finds its feet, it does develop a life of its own. And actually, when it steps away from the prog rock element,
steps beyond even.
Steps beyond. Yeah. Once it steps beyond that, I actually found it quite middle of the road, but quite an enjoyable listen, ish.
Yeah, I mean, it's me actually. But my problem was it's not prog enough. I mean, they are allegedly one of the prog rock greats, and this album falls down a bit on the prog and the rock for me. It's more of a kind of 80s AOR record.
It does slip into 80s, yeah.
And that's which and as you say, the songs themselves are actually fine. And with a couple of listens, it's not a difficult album to listen to by any means. But by the same token, it's not something that you're really going to remember particularly either. I mean, Step Beyond has a nice little riff going on, in it, which is quite nice. Keep synth riff, but bizarrely that song seems to drag on for quite a long time, which is really bizarre. Because it's actually shorter than the 2 tracks that precede it, and yet it kind of feels longer, which is a bit odd.
That's never good.
Yeah, and for me, the best bits are the bits where it kind of goes off on one and does proggy stuff. So the middle bit of Believe and the bit in Subway Walls, the final track, when you actually get a bit kind of prog,
bit in the middle,
jazz fusion instrumental stuff.
Yes.
That's where you're thinking this is what this record should be having more of. Not this AOR rubbish.
Yeah.
Because I can live with another AOR album.
Yeah, true. It does seem lodged in the mid to late 80s. We'll talk about another album in a moment that's lodged in that period, but probably for different reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the reasons here are quite negative.
So, moving on to the album by the Roux that I couldn't remember the title of.
Trouble in Paradise.
Trouble in Paradise. Second album, following her debut in 2009. An album that I own and like.
I have a feeling this is the first debut album is one of the very first records we possibly reviewed on this podcast.
Distinct possibility. I do believe we did review it.
Yeah.
So it's Elliot Jackson or the band as then was Elliot Jackson and record producer Ben Langmaid.
Yeah.
Although he has since left the building.
Yes.
Because they fell out.
Trouble in Paradise.
Indeed.
See?
Although he did still co-wrote, co-produced, whatever 5 of the songs on here. It's an interesting record. She's obviously moved away from the 80s electronica, but then moved to more late 70s, early 80s disco vibe. Hasn't
moved very far.
Yeah. To drive the main sound. So there's more guitar on the album, although it's very muted. So we get the opener that, as someone said to me last week, sounds a bit like Kelly Marie.
Right.
And Kiss and Tell, I think, keeps up this mood. And they're both 2 really good pop tunes, I think. And at this point in the album, I was actually quite happy, thinking, this is all right. Yeah, I quite like it. We've moved a bit, but actually, I'm still going to like this album as much as I like the debut. And then, it sounds like I'm going to criticise Bananarama, but it goes a bit Bananarama, and actually in not necessarily a good way. So you get Cruel Sex and Tropical Chancer and this Sexotech, which are all very kind of Bananarama, but not necessarily in a good way, and don't really do anything for me at all.
Okay.
And I just was losing the album altogether then. But then, just before the end, you have Silent Partner comes in, longest song on the album, which actually comes across more like a kind of disco remix of something that might have been on the previous album.
Okay.
And I think it's possibly the best song on the album, alongside Let Me Down Gently, which follows it, which I think is another cracker. Last track, Feeling, again, put me to sleep. So, opening 2 tracks, Silent Partner and Let Me Down Gently, good. Rest of the album.
Okay. I agree with some of that. I actually enjoyed the bits that you perhaps didn't enjoy so much. I have to admit, as much as you love the debut album, I was a little bit underwhelmed by it at the time. I'm now going to go back after this podcast and listen to it again, having listened to this album. This album, to me, actually, I enjoyed much more. I also found the vulnerability in the lyrics, and particularly if you know anything about the history of the world, obviously the obvious history of the band that we've touched on is that one of them's left. A key partner has left, and clearly that runs through the theme of some of the lyrics as well. But also the troubles that Ellie Jackson has had subsequently with fame and even with her voice comes through, and there's some real raw emotion in this album, which I think was actually lacking from the original.
Possibly.
So that's what I found interesting, and certainly that came through on songs like Cruel Sexuality, Paradise Is You, etc., where it does go a little bit, as you put it, Bananarama. Bananarama, but I actually found it quite sensitive.
But
I think it's a very fair point you make.
I should say I like Bananarama.
No, I know. I don't. No. Musically, it's very tight. It's very good. But Bananarama or not, I know exactly. It's the good Bananarama that you're talking about. I know exactly where you're coming from. But I completely agree with you. The highlight of the album has to be Silent Partner, followed by that shift into Let Me Down Gently. We talk a lot about albums and sequencing. The sequencing there is brilliant. You have Silent Partner, and then it just goes bang into Let Me Down Gently, and it's like they're performing it in the room with you, and just the mixing there is fantastic. So highlight of the album, and then of course you get the feeling at the end, which just lets it all down. Yeah,
it's the only track of the album she wrote herself, unfortunately. But
it's probably the most personal, and yet it's probably the weakest point.
Yeah.
But other than that, really enjoyed this album.
So sticking with our dancing shoes on, we move on to the 4th album from Cut Copy, Free Your Mind, which came out virtually everywhere last year, but has only just kind of surfaced.
Or 1989.
In the UK, yeah. 1999 or 67, because apparently the Summers of Love in 67 and 89 were the 88, 89 were the two inspirations behind this album. So San Francisco 67, UK 88, 89.
Right.
You wouldn't guess, would you?
No, not at all.
Manchester.
Yes.
Yeah. So, over to you, Pete.
Oh yeah, let's talk to the token Mancunian in the room. It's where to begin? This album really surprised me because it's not what I was expecting.
Their last album sounds nothing like this.
No, exactly. I mean, we talk about bands like doing something different. Well, you can't fault them for doing something different. They've taken that theme and they have run with it. And I think perhaps what lets this album... I'm going to focus on the negative thing first. What lets this album down for me is perhaps some of the production. It doesn't quite sound as tight as it should be. Mm-hmm. And in fact, and maybe this is a thing they were deliberately going for, I was listening to this album earlier, and despite listening to it on digital quality, I felt like I was listening to it on a cassette. Maybe that's intended.
Yeah,
going
perhaps.
with the obviously the theme of the album. Okay, the quibble aside, I actually found some of the album. In fact, I found most of this album really enjoyable. Yeah. Again, for some of the reasons I've touched on with the Roux record. That lyrically, I thought it was really spot on in terms of in terms of going for the theme and talking about what it's like to be in a club or in a rave or in 1988. It really got the soul of what was going on there. quite an early highlight for me was the cover of "Let Me Show You Love," which is obviously a classic from the era. Although I always thought that was more early 90s, but still, that could just be me and what I remember, which is probably all a bit of a blur. That was really good, and the way they just dropped that in there. And that's the thing. The album again feels sequenced, and you've got these little, between some of the tracks, you've got these little skits of little sort of cuts of people talking and dialogue and noodling. But it sort of fits the theme, and you know. And at one point, there's even someone talking about Alleluia, because only moments before I had thought of the Oakenfold remix of the Happy Mondays tune of the same name, you know. So they've really done the research and gone for it. But as I say, my only sort of feeling was that it perhaps just wasn't as sharp as it could have been, and that's why, if you're going to go for a record of the era, you best listening to something recorded then.
See, your last comment there is what sums this album up for me. As someone that was obviously started university 88, 89, the whole of that kind of sound was the thing that permeated my early university days. So this is going back to that kind of time, and whilst it is done. So it's almost like a pastiche in a way, and it takes kind of Yeasayer kind of one step further in that kind of sense.
Yeah.
But as I said, but without the kind of production quality, perhaps, of Yeasayer.
I'm glad you mentioned Yeasayer, because that thought occurred.
Yeah. But as you say, it kind of starts off with intro, which is almost kind of like particularly the very first intro is very kind of almost Todd Rundgren type things on a couple of his things. Don't want to get back to the usual referencing today. Yeah. Before it then becomes kind of Yaz meets Primal Scream.
Yes.
On Free Your Mind. And then when you go, as you said, when you go through the record, you're pretty much ticking off, you're going, oh yeah, there's the Mondays, there's the Charlatans, there's some more Primal Scream, there's a bit of Erasure, hints of PSB and OMD in there as well.
Yes. Yes.
That kind of stuff. And it's fine, but I was left just thinking I'd prefer to go back and listen to the stuff from then if I wanted to listen to this kind of things. Although I do like We Are Explorers. Dark Corners is also a track I liked, which has that almost kind of the kind of singing's almost kind of Brian Ferry-esque, and music is very George Harrison-esque.
Yeah.
Although that might be mainly because it does nick My Sweet Lord's Melody.
You don't want to go there, folks.
Yeah. And yeah, so I got in the album having listened to their last album, which like I said doesn't sound like this. It's fine.
Yeah.
But I can't fault it. Some of the songs are good, but I did get to the end just thinking, however good these bits are. And Meet Me in the House of Love actually is a great song as well.
Again, like the LaRue album, I think it peaks about 2 tracks too soon before the end. And I really like the mixing of Meet Me in the House of Love, which for personal reasons mentions the lyrics come together, which of course really chimes with the era as well.
Yeah.
And then goes into Take Me Higher, which again couldn't be closer to Screamadelica if you wanted.
Absolutely.
So it really peaks there, and then it sort of tapers off a bit. It's just like, how do we finish this? Well, we don't come down sharply. We just come down.
On that note, we'll finish that.
That
was
bum
good.
note.
I like
That's
that.
a bum note.
I know, but I like that.
You like that? Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey.
Good soundbite there, kids. So we finish off with the solo outing from ex-Rilo Keeley frontwoman Jenny Lewis, the Voyager. And this is an album that's taken about 4 years to make, having suffered from kind of chronic insomnia for kind of 2 years, and the breakup of the band and death of a dad and various other kind of things going on in her life. So she decided to kind of write a collection of songs with not always cheery lyrics, it has to be said, but to write a nice kind of upbeat sounding record. So you got a collection, basically it's a collection of mostly upbeat pop tunes with slightly less upbeat lyrics about relationships, mostly ones going wrong, infidelity, the biological clock ticking, death, a few other things. Musically, it kind of sits somewhere between kind of Camera Obscura, Fleetwood Mac, who I think are probably the band we've mentioned most on this podcast in the last kind of 18 months.
True, actually, yeah.
And Rio Keeley themselves, and also with a smattering of the Bangles thrown in there as well. Album's produced by Ryan Adams, and also Beck produced one of the tracks on it as well. And it's an album that I think on repeat listenings kind of really kind of warms, and I think because it is a collection of just nice tunes essentially. So I think it starts off great with Head Underwater, which is one of my favourite tracks on it, which is very much Fleetwood Mac-y, but then has a surprise DM guitar part in it. Doom 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 doom. Actually pops up in the middle of.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Now you mention it. Yeah.
Exactly. So I really like that. I really like the kind of lyrics to "She's Not Me" about somebody that's basically kind of fucked up the relationship by cheating on the other half, and then fessing up, and he's then gone off and he's got happy and met the woman of his dreams, and she's still standing around with nothing going on. Yeah. One of the guys trying to fit in, which is the song that Beck produced. Really like guitar, some really great guitar on Slippery Slopes, which I really like. And then I just like some of the lyrics when it goes through. You can't outrun M and the New You. I quite like the whole kind of vibe of those, and Hello and the Three Johns, when there's a great line about the character reading Slash's autobiography, and then throwing
finding a TV,
throwing a TV smashed outside of a kind of room window. So that whole kind of vision I quite liked. I just think it's just a really lovely record.
Yeah. Obviously, it's got devastating lyrics in part, and it is such an upbeat record musically. And I tell you what, our sex doesn't come out of this album very well at all. I was about to say our genre then, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, what can I add? I mean, Aloha and the Three Johns is actually done very well.
Yeah,
it's a comedy record.
It is almost, yeah.
I was listening to that. I've listened to that record, that track in particular, several times, trying to figure out what the episode is about, because it feels like you are listening to the most entertaining story or anecdote, And there are other moments like that in the album, like Just One of the Guys, and Slippery Slopes. You feel that she's singing very personally and from the heart at times, and yet actually on other records she's got that great ability of a storyteller just to pick little bits of information from other people and combine it into something greater than some of the parts. So lyrically it's very strong in places. It needs a couple of listens. I have to admit, the first time I listened to this record, I did struggle with it. Not sure why now I've listened to it a few times. So definitely one. It's an entertaining record if you like a story, if you like your lyrics to tell a story,
and if you like a kind of I suppose a kind of relaxed kind of South Californian kind of
you don't have to think about this
musical
too much.
Sound.
You don't have to know the history. It's just all there for you. Yeah, that's a good one to finish on. Actually.
I think it is.
Yeah.
So is Roux your favourite album of the podcast?
Well, it's a toughie, this one, because I'm trying to think what's the outstanding album. That's a theme for 2014, isn't it?
It is a theme for 2014.
So I mean, Roux certainly for me was the most polished and at times the most personal. Cut Copy, most fascinating. I could listen to that again and again and again. My opinion probably wouldn't change that much, though.
Yeah.
And then we've talked about Jenny Lewis there at the end. So, plump for one. I'll go with LaRue.
I would probably just edge towards Jenny Lewis, although with a special nod to 5 Seconds of Summer, dare I say it.
Okay. Wow. A 5 second nod.
Indeed.
There you go.
Until next time, peeps. You've been listening to the CTTV Music Podcast.